The blue screen of death, or the BSOD, nowadays is called the stop screen, but regardless, this is kind of how it looks. I just did a simple Google search for Windows stop screen. In the old days, it looked more like this over here. I'm just going to see if I can open up this article here. And you can see it looked a lot like this, a lot of ads. Usually it doesn't come with ads when you see a blue screen of death. But anyway, it looks a lot like this. So it'll identify kind of the general area of the problem, page fault in non-paged area. Not very helpful in that sense. But what it will show you is this right here. So for example, I guess I can't click and drag in a screenshot, but it says this right here, some driver, a .sys file is a driver file. So very often this is also what causes a blue screen of death, particularly if it's an older driver or a legacy driver of some type, okay? Anyway, that's kind of the old version. It's probably been 2 or 3 versions of Windows ago when they looked like that. But you can see why it was called the blue screen of death. First of all, the entire operating system stops. You cannot interact with it at all. The only other thing you could possibly do would be to hit the power or the reset switch on the computer, but that doesn't get you much. All that's going to do is get you to a restarted position faster. When the blue screen of death or stop screen occurs, very often it will, or usually does, a memory dump. There's a couple of different types of dump that it can do, and it'll usually dump out the most significant portions of memory so that you can kind of trace back to what was going on at the time of the blue screen of death. Now, the reality is it's very rarely, if ever, useful. You have to analyze that dump file pretty much on a forensic basis, way beyond normal desktop troubleshooting. So that's what I want to say right from the start here. So it may be obvious where, for example, that blue screen that we just saw showed a specific driver that was causing the problem. That's fine. But other times it might give you just like some kind of a memory address or some hex code that was just not really very useful. Let's take a look at another one. These are the more common types that you might see, like this, okay? And this will just tell us it ran into some kind of a problem, okay? We're collecting some error information, and then we'll restart for you, and then it kind of gives you a countdown. When it reaches 100% complete, it'll restart. This is a QR code that, as long as you're waiting anyway, and this, by the way, can take several minutes, depending on the size of the dump file and how much memory you have. Because, of course, the more memory you have and the more that's in memory, the longer it's going to take to dump everything out to a dump file. But while you're waiting, you can get your phone out and scan the QR code. No, it's not for a free prize or something, or a lottery ticket. What that is for is to take you to a website that hopefully would provide a little bit more enlightenment for this. So, for example, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of fuzzy. It says, for more information about this issue and, what's it say, possible fixes, visit this area right here, this website, okay, which just says stop code. Rarely, if ever, does that provide you anything useful in troubleshooting the system. In fact, I've never really gotten anything useful out of it. But all that being said, let's take a look at more details about the BSOD. So again, it's currently the stop screen, a lot of times caused by the drivers that could either be faulty or that conflict with something else. This is becoming increasingly rare. I used to see a lot more BSODs than I do now because drivers have become much more mature. Microsoft, and in order for the drivers to be listed in Windows updates, because a lot of times they'll be delivered with Microsoft's updates, they have to pass muster on a lot of pretty stringent testing. So we don't see them as much as we used to, but I do still get these. I've probably in the last 3 or 4 years, I think I've had 3 or 4 of these. So maybe once a year, for me anyway. Could also be from a hardware failure though, and that's not really the fault of Microsoft or of the driver. If there's a failing problem or an intermittent problem with the actual physical hardware, well, that's going to be another whole issue. So that could have happened on any system, whether it's a Linux system, a Windows system, whatever. Okay, could be RAM is failing. Now that's a little difficult to diagnose and to troubleshoot. Again, it may appear in the dump file that it's a RAM issue, but again, you'd probably have to get almost forensic in order to be able to analyze that. And how would RAM become a problem? Well, hardware does just fail, even if you didn't abuse it. Even if you didn't apply a static shock to it and ruin one of the chips, something like that, it could still just fail. But you may have also been digging around in your side of your computer, plugging in a cable, something like that, and actually touched a memory module. and hit it right on the chip if they're exposed. Fortunately, the heat spreaders on a lot of those prevent that kind of thing from happening anymore. Or it could be a CPU problem. Generally speaking, again, CPUs don't usually fail on their own very much. However, if they get too hot, then they will start to. So if your heat sink is failing, or if your thermal paste kind of got crusty or it needs to be replaced, we'll talk about that again later, or you just allowed too much dust to accumulate in it. Again, anything that rises your temperature can really hurt any of these things that we're seeing here, but especially sensitive to that is the CPU. The GPU is also sensitive to that. So that's normally going to be on your video card. And if the fans for some reason got jammed, maybe you had some cables in there and one got kind of errant and started rubbing against the fan, so it slowed it down, heated up the GPU, that sort of thing. Again, you could be having some problems there. Or, we don't really see this as much as we used to, but some people used to use GPUs for a lot of crypto mining. So they would really overstress those GPUs and make them work extremely hard to the point it would shorten the life of the GPU and potentially cause blue screen of death. Hard disk drives, solid state drives, all of those kind of failures could cause a BSOD. So basically, what am I trying to say here? Just about anything can cause a BSOD, okay? If it happens on occasion, like it does with me, maybe once a year, I'm not too concerned about it. We got hundreds, probably 100 million lines of code in Windows, plus all of the variables in terms of the hardware and drivers and all their applications we have running. Eventually, things are going to collide, and a blue screen could result. So I'm not too concerned about that on an occasional basis. But if I get 2 or 3 of them in a week, then I'm starting to get concerned. Okay, corrupt system files could cause it as well. If it's a corrupt system file, this probably would also be accompanied by unable to properly boot into Windows, because system files are necessary to boot and run Windows. Or a corrupt registry could also be causing this. Okay, so these are causes. By the way, in some of the troubleshooting discussions I'll be having in this skill, I'll have one slide for causes, the other slide for solutions. In some topics, the cause, the inverse of that will be the solution. So you'll see that it'll be obvious as we go. But again, overtemp could definitely be an issue there. Or here's another one, power issues. So if you have a failing power supply that does not deliver clean, regular, consistent power, that can also cause a blue screen of death. Sometimes a recent update could cause it, or recent software that you've installed could also cause it. So anyway, all of these things could cause it, okay? You don't need to chase it down unless it becomes a regular issue. And by the way, if it becomes a regular issue, reality is sometimes it's easier just to nuke the system and restart, okay? For example, reinstall the operating system, applications that are needed, something like that. You may have an imaging solution that can do that and make it easier. But if you restore everything like from a known good image and it still gives you the problem, very likely a hardware issue. So let's take a look at some of these instability solutions, BSOD and instability issues. It's not always going to result in a stop screen. And again, that's synonymous with BSOD here. So it's not always going to be that. It might just be that the system is generally unstable and not reliable. Besides the BSODs, it could simply be a spontaneous reboot. You didn't get a BSOD, you didn't get that blue screen, but suddenly, you're sitting here just kind of, thinking about where you're going to go to lunch, and your computer just restarted. It volunteered to restart for some unknown reason. Well, that would be an instability. That's a good example of that. So again, a lot of times you'll get a stop code or an error named that you can investigate if you need to. You might also be able to uninstall something that you recently installed or roll back drivers, because those can usually be rolled back when you install a new driver. Or, like we looked at previously in the last skill, you could go to a previous restore point. Maybe that'll help resolve the issue. Now, a lot of times if it relates to system files, what can you do? Well, here's a command. I'll show this to you here in a moment, but you could use deployment, imaging, and service management, I think is what that stands for, DISM. We use that for a lot of deployment solutions on more enterprise solutions, but it can also be used for this. So you can use it to clean up an image and restore the health of your Windows side-by-side directory. So let's go back to our virtual machine. Oh, this was from our last skill. Remember I started a restore point from within, where was that? WinRE. And then you see it successfully restored it. Anyway, so the Windows side-by-side directory, let's talk about that. If I go into the C drive and then go into Windows and then WinSXS, there it is right there. What is that? That is a repository of known good Windows files. So when I install Windows, it also creates this WinSXS side-by-side directory where it's got, here, let's open it up, a repository of known good sources for your operating system. Now, we're not going to, of course, analyze that in every detail, but what that does for us is it makes a source of known good files. So then, if one of my active Windows files becomes corrupt or has some kind of a problem, then I can use this tool, the System File Checker, to scan now. And then what it'll do is it will scan and look for corrupt files, and it will replace the corrupt system files with files that it extracts out of the Windows side-by-side directory. So if I go to a command prompt and open this as an administrator, then I can run those two commands I just showed you. So DISM, online, cleanup, image. It's not case sensitive in Windows, remember, so that's not an issue here. And restore health. So what that would do is it would inspect my side-by-side directory to make sure that all the files in there are correct and in good shape. If necessary, it can also download them from Microsoft's update site if there's a version that needs to be updated. The side-by-side directory is also updated whenever there's a major update to the Windows operating system. Anyway, that's probably taking a little bit longer than I expected, so I'm going to go ahead and start another prompt here, and I'll run that one also as an administrator, and I'll run the other command that I showed you, sfc /scan now. Is that right? Does it have two ends? Yes, it does. Okay, so I'll press enter there, and what that'll do is it's going to go through all of my active operating system files to see if there's any problems with them, if they're in good health. They should be in this case. But if they're not, it can restore them from the side-by-side directory that I showed you a moment ago. Also, we can go into Event Viewer and look at the system logs. We looked at that earlier, so I'm not going to go through that again. But remember, there's different kinds of errors. There's warnings, there's critical. Those would certainly be ones you'd want to look at. You can also run Windows Memory Diagnostics or a tool called MemTest 86. Generally, we run that from a USB drive. And for that, I just took a screenshot from the website where you can get this. Actually, I'll show it to you also. So here's MemTest 86. You can download it. It's normally something that you would run from a USB because you don't want the operating system itself to be running when you run this. And this will check through your memory sticks to make sure that they're healthy. So if you suspect it's a memory issue, run this tool and it will inspect. Now, A+ is not going to ask you if you know about this tool specifically, but they may want you to know that you may need to test your memory. There is also a Windows Memory Diagnostics that you can run. Okay, so I'll just type Windows Memory Diagnostic. Here it is. This again will do a memory analysis, but it can only do it when Windows is not running. So it would restart, put itself in the bootable process to where it can boot to that, and then it will check for any memory errors that you can encounter. And since some of the things that I launched are taking a long time, I'm going to continue on and we'll return to some of this other stuff. Okay, the other thing is always check for BIOS and UEFI updates, okay? The reason why that's significant is because those are very low-level access, direct access, really, to the hardware on the system. And so if some hardware is causing an issue, a BIOS update may resolve that. Not always, but it's worth giving it a try. And then also, you might be overclocking. If you're an overclocker, and we talked about that in the first course, this is where you apply, usually it's additional voltage to your hardware, such as your CPU or your RAM. And when you do that, it increases the performance of the system. A lot of gamers and hobbyists really like to overclock. But you also introduce instability to your system when you do that. I didn't do it on the computer I'm recording on right now, but on the previous generation to what I have now, I did. And I did get more blue screen of death now that I think about it. So I think that was 2 or 3 years ago. So I guess I did have more BSODs back then. But anyway, that was because I was overclocking and I did it too much. As soon as I backed off on my overclocking, I didn't get any more stop screens anymore. I also talked to you about New Relic previously. That's a really good tool. I do like it a lot, and you might want to look into it. And there's also this Who Crashed. So let me show you that one here. Before we get to that, let's go back to this. We see that everything's finished on DISM. Looks like all the files are healthy there. We did this SFC scan now again, verified 100% of the files. Everything looked fine and didn't see any integrity violations in any of the files. But if I wanted to test the memory using Windows Memory Diagnostic, I would restart the computer and it will go through it. And you can see here it's going through some of the tests. I doubt if it's going to find any problems, so I'm just going to leave that as is. But if it did find a problem, it would notify you. Now let me go to this utility Who Crashed. This, again, is not an A+ tool that you need to know about, but I'll briefly show it to you here because it's very useful. I'm going to go ahead and launch it. It's somewhere. I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I guess I already had it open. So anyway, when you get a lot of these crashes that occur, there's, for example, a blue screen of death or a stop screen. That's going to create what we call a mini dump. Okay, at the very least. It might also create a full dump. There's ways to configure that. So a mini dump will dump from RAM the core operating system functions that were taking place and what was in memory at that time. And you can see here, at one point I had a internal error, and if I click on this, then that you can go to look at, it just takes you to Google, takes you to look at certain problems that could help resolve that. Let's go back to the crash thing. It also shows me which driver it ran into a problem with. Now, why is this all significant? Because if you look through dump files, you'll lose your sanity. They're very hard to read. They're not very user-friendly. This kind of a tool here makes it a lot easier. Okay, so it tells me what file was in place. Look, here's another one. It looks like I had the problem with this watchdog.sys 3 times in a row. Can't really remember much about that. Doesn't seem to be a problem now. But anyway, these are video-related crashes, as you can see right here. What else have we got? Here's a DirectX graphics kernel issue. Okay, so that was a problem there. Here are the dump files. So a kernel memory dump is the entire contents of all of your memory. A mini dump is just the kind of the highlights of what was going on in memory at the time. I'm going to let this go for now because, again, you don't have to know that tool specifically for A+, but it is very, very useful. And here's the website that you can get this from. They have also got a lot of other pretty good tools to look at. So I'll leave that to you. I'll put a link for this in the video below the video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from CBT Nuggets. Also, if you're new to IT or are interested in an IT career, visit cbtnuggets.com and sign up for a free trial.